The next thing we want to do for our image is to cut out the sky behind Krista because we want to use this awesome sky with these gorgeous clouds. Even though this was pretty, it's so boring, and boring does not cut it in this class. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control J to make a copy of this Krista outside layer. Turn every other layer off beneath it, and let's delete this layer mask by right-clicking on the layer mask, delete layer mask. We are going to make a selection and turn that selection into a mask. So I'll show you how to do that. If we select like the quick selection tool, make sure my layer is selected, then I go onto my layer and drag it out to select the sky. You can see that it's pretty simply made a quick selection around my sky, and now if I click the new layer mask icon, it'll make a layer mask out of whatever my selection is. So remember, if you have a current selection, it'll be seen as these marching ants that surround wherever your selection is. So let's click new layer. Now we have a new layer, but it is the opposite of what we want. So just to inverse that layer, because remember, a layer mask is an image of black and white. The inverse of black and white is white and black. So if we click Control I to inverse this image, we can see that it's now changed our image to what we want. So I'll do that. I'll show you how it looks on here. Control I. I'll just show you the exact opposite mask. Okay, so we have this mask, and if you zoom in here, you can see it doesn't look great, but there are some things that we can do to make it better. So what we're going to do is we are going to go to Select and Mask. If you have a selection tool, you'll see Select and Mask up here. Or when you have a selection, so let's delete this layer mask again. I'll just show you how to do it from the beginning. And I'm gonna also select in here. So I'll bring my brush size down, select right in there, and I'll remove that by clicking Alt and selecting. Good, I just need to make sure everything is as I want it. I'll bring this antenna back in by making a really small brush and clicking Alt. Great. And as you're about to see, this doesn't need to be perfect. So remember, if I made a mask out of this selection, it would be the inverse of the mask I actually want. Instead of having to do that, I could inverse my selection right now by going to Select, Inverse. Now you can see all the other pixels are in my selection. So we will now click on Select and Mask. This will bring up, it's kind of like a whole new program within Photoshop to help you make awesome selections. So as you can see, it's made a selection for us. This is the exact same thing as what would have happened if we had just clicked on the Create New Layer Mask icon. But in Select and Mask, we have a lot more options. We can change how we see the layer mask by the view box up here. So I could see it as an onion skin, as marching ants, so kind of showing the selection before I made a mask out of it. Could show an overlay, could show, this will darken out the areas that aren't being visible. This will lighten the areas that aren't being visible. This will just show you a layer mask. This will show the layers beneath it. So the most useful for what we're doing right now is going to be overlay. So we can see direct contrast between the black and our image. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of these tools up here to refine our selection. So let's go to an area, let's see. When we zoom in, you can see how like pixely it looks, and it's just not great. And we see this little border of sky around everything. We are going to use the Refine Edge brush. So there's two brush tools in Select and Mask. There's the brush tool, which can, if I bring the size of this brush up, you'll be able to see really clearly. So it'll just brush there as if I was painting on a layer mask. And I can select the Remove brush to remove areas of my image. I don't want to do that either. I want to use the Refine Edge brush tool. This is a really smart tool that you can only access through Select and Mask. So if I zoom into an area of my image, you can see it's not a perfect transition between the visible and non-visible areas of the image. I see some of the sky in here. The Refine Edge brush tool will specifically tell Photoshop to analyze this area of the image on the border of my mask and decide which pixels should be visible and which shouldn't based on the contrast and the surrounding image. So if I start my brush stroke from a little bit outside of the selection, bring it in, and then brush over this area, I get a much better selection. I'll do it back this way. You can see it's not perfect. For example, right here, kind of made some mistakes. So I can go over it again. If I bring the brush size down, I can go over it again, be like, you messed up, Photoshop. Oh, that was my brush tool. I want my Refine Edge brush tool. So I'll bring that down, say Photoshop, look at that again. And then I could use my brush tool, bring it to a smaller size, and just paint out some of these areas. Good. If I want to bring something back in, and change it there, and that looks great. Now I'll just keep going around the borders of my mask here with the Refine Edge brush tool to refine this mask. As I'm doing it, I'm getting these little weird things. I don't know, maybe those were like trees or something. I'll just change my view mode. No, it's just being weird. Okay, well, that's okay. I'll just paint that out. Go to my paintbrush tool, paint it out. Now I don't have any weird little defects. Good, that's looking great. I'll keep going with this Refine Edge brush tool around the building. I want to know whose house this was because it looks great and I want it. I'll just go all the way to the edge. You can see that automatically it's done a pretty dang good job. I can kind of fix some areas. Oops. So I'll add some of this back in because it made a weird thing there. And now let's go upper arm. So, oops, keep forgetting to select the right tool. So if I do this, you can see that it's just making the selection so much more specific right here. And it doesn't look as pixely, which is great because that would have looked terrible. And it adds a little bit of a gradient within the mask. This can be good when we bring the sky in behind it to kind of blend it a little better. Luckily, this is a pretty easy area to adjust because the sky that we're going to bring in is very similar to the sky that we took out. So areas that aren't exactly perfectly masked out won't be too much of a problem. And you can see when I'm working on the hair, this tool does such a good job. So again, select the plus option, select outside, drag it inwards. I'm just telling it, reanalyze these areas and cut out the areas of the sky and leave the hair. So this is looking great. Let's go around here to smooth this area out. That was an awesome difference right there. And you see this kind of, because this area of the car and this area are slightly different, this kind of matches the sky more, especially since it's reflecting off of there. So I want to paint that back in manually. All I have to do is, with my brush tool, paint that back in. Oh, that's looking great. So I'll go over here, do the same thing, refine this edge. Great. Added a little area there. So I could select the minus refine edge tool, but sometimes that causes more problems than it solves. But basically what it does is it says, hey, you did too much, take some of that back. I'm just gonna have to do this part manually as well. Okay. In the original image, this top of the car is a much more clear line. I want to try to recreate that. So let's see if this is going to be useful at all to redo that. Oh, that was my paintbrush tool. Yeah, this isn't being super helpful, but for now, we are going to do this so it smoothens out this area a little bit more. You can see this top line here is where we want it, and even though it's making some of these pixels semi-transparent, that's okay, because we can go back in when we create a mask out of this selection and paint over that. So I'm just making sure the general idea is good, and this looks great. Now, what we can do, there are some options over here. We can smooth out our selection, feather our selection, bring the edge of a whole selection in or out. Because we use the Refine Edge tool on almost all of it, these wouldn't be super helpful at this point. So this looks how I want it. Now I have an option down here to output to selection, layer mask, and a couple other options, but in general, I'm going to create layer masks out of these. So I could output it to a selection and then create a layer mask out of that selection, but this just allows me to skip a step, so I'll click output to layer mask, and there we go. We have a layer based on everything we did in select and mask. It's not perfect, but we're not done.